It's Friday, the 17th of January 2025. Welcome to the Fast 5 Business News by Fear and Greed, where we give you the top 5 business stories you need to know in just 5 minutes. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, 5 stories, 5 minutes. Let's get going. Story number 1 is a big one. A bumper jobs report yesterday shows that more than 56,000 people found work last month, which was much, much higher than expected, and enough to dampen expectations of an interest rate cut before May.
About 4 times higher than expected, Michael. Predictions of a slowdown in the labour market have been made for about the last 12 months. They haven't arrived yet. 56,300 new jobs last month. The unemployment rate went from 3.9% to 4%, still very, very low. The participation rate, people in the workforce looking for a job, it hit a record high of 67.1%. Now, the top line is very strong. Underneath that, the big jump was in part-time jobs. There was actually lots of full-time jobs. Underemployment fell, hours worked rose. No doubt, overall, it was a very strong report. Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, thought so. He said the economy was coming in for a soft landing.
Interest rates. Sean, what does it mean?
Well, it probably means that there's no need for the Reserve Bank to rush in cutting rates. They can probably afford to wait and see. Last week, we had November underlying inflation figures. They were really good. We get the whole December quarter next week. There's also economic growth figures coming up, more labour force figures coming up. So I think the Reserve Bank will probably just sit back and wait for a while.
So all the growing enthusiasm about a rate cut next month, maybe just put the brakes on a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. Diffused somewhat.
Indeed. Okay, story number 2. Sean, the strong jobs number yesterday, it didn't seem to stop the local share market much, did it? With the ASX ending up nearly 1.5%.
So you think it might, because if we're not having rate cuts, that might hurt earnings. So therefore, the share market could be hurt. Not yesterday. Basically, we've got inflation figures out of the US. They were lower than expected, easing fears about inflation in the world's biggest economy. That sent up Wall Street. We followed. The big banks were the best performers. Commonwealth Bank jumped 3%. Biggest company on the bourse, jumping 3%. That's you're going to end up having a good day for the ASX. All the rate-sensitive tech and property stocks tended to outperform. The underperformers, they were the stocks that were less reliant on interest rates, things like healthcare companies, consumer staple companies, utility companies. Stock-specific, Zip Code jumped after Sezzle, which is another buy now, pay later group, upgraded its revenue guidance. Neuron Pharmaceuticals rebounded after a tough session the previous day. Tabcorp Holdings jumped after it announced its first ever chief wagering officer. All in all, the market was up 1.4% yesterday.
Story number 3, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has welcomed the announcement of a 6-week ceasefire between Israel and Hamas following 15 months of conflict.
The deal to end the war was announced following days of negotiations in Qatar and is due to begin on Sunday. Around 1,200 Israelis and 46,000 Palestinians have been killed over the course of the war. The deal promises the release of 33 of the nearly 100 Israeli hostages over the initial 6-week halt to fighting, with some Palestinian prisoners also to be returned from Israel. Second phase of the deal will include negotiations over the 6 weeks to permanently end the war. A third phase will include the return of the final hostages and reconstruction of Gaza. Anthony Albanese said that the agreement was a constructive step towards peace and stability. He said it must mark the beginning of a new chapter for the Israeli and Palestinian people.
Story number 4, President Joe Biden has used his farewell address to the nation yesterday to deliver stark warnings about an oligarchy of the ultra-wealthy taking root in the country and a tech industrial complex that is infringing on Americans' rights and the future of democracy. I can't figure out who he's talking about here. Sean, can you help me out?
No idea. Speaking from the Oval Office, Mr. Biden, as he prepares to hand over power to President-elect Donald Trump, seized what is likely to be his final opportunity to address the country, to spotlight the accumulation of power and wealth in the US among just a few people. And I quote, "Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead." He drew attention to a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a few ultra-wealthy people and the dangerous consequences of their abuse of power if left unchecked.
Last one, story number 5, Starbucks, Sean, will require people visiting its coffee shops to buy something in order to stay or to use its toilets. Seems fair enough to me.
It does, but it's not very Starbucks-ish. Lounging in the Starbucks lounge, a favoured pastime of many, ain't going to be allowed. The new policy outlined in a code of conduct will be enacted later this month. It applies to the company's cafes, patios and bathrooms. It's a pretty practical step, really, to help prioritise paying customers who want to sit around and enjoy the cafes, find a seat, use the restrooms, etc. However, it does reverse a policy Starbucks instituted in 2018 that said people could just come in, use the cafes and bathrooms, even if they hadn't bought anything.
There we go, the top 5 business stories in 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Friday, the 17th of January, 2025. Remember to hit follow on the podcast, and if 5 minutes isn't enough, you can find our longer daily show called Fear and Greed wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was the Fast 5 Business News by Fear and Greed. Have a great day.